We're starting this podcast, MindFit, once again. My name is Robert Aceves, and I'm here with Neil Babins. How are you, Neil?
Doing very well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm really happy to come back. I just got back from a trip to Ecuador. How you doing?
Oh, Ecuador. That's beautiful. So you saw the Amazons.
I did.
Yeah.
I was able to go to an Amazonian community and do a bunch of really cool things over there. And it was really interesting to see, even though right now, there's that fire in the southern part of the Amazon, and it's really sad to see, all the stuff that's amazing and it's being burned off,
That's too bad. It's such a beautiful land. Yeah.
I know. But anyway, so today we're going to talk about, self-diagnosing and how sometimes people tend to diagnose themselves. We talked about this a while back, the idea of how, when I was in college, I remember taking a class called Abnormal Psychology. And, we're reading about all this all this diagnosing and mental disorders and problems that people may have. And I remember, every class I would read about this and then walk out feeling like I, had some kind of OCD or I had some kind of problem with myself because, in reality, I think we all have something, but, it's not. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What do you think?
I think that a lot of people do exactly what you did. They say commonly in psychology courses, this teacher will often say, now you're going to want to read these books and then start diagnosing your friends, your family, especially your exes. You're going to want to start diagnosing yourself, but be careful of doing that because there's a lot more that goes into it than just reading a list and saying, yeah, I do that. Yeah, I do that. It's a question of it being pervasive and consistent and causing a certain amount of ongoing distress. So there's a problem with that. The problem is when it becomes too pop culturalized, when certain things like people just randomly say, I'm OCD. And what do you mean by that? Right. Well, I have to have everything in order. I'm like, that means you have to have everything in order. That doesn't mean you are OCD. So, or people say I'm depressed. I'm like, really? They'll say, yeah, I just watched a really sad movie. I'm like, well, that usually does not cause depression. So that's the difference between sadness and depression, being ultra organized and wanting things your way and being OCD. There's, people tend to do that and they take something very casual and they make it very diagnostic, so to speak. And I think that there's a muddled gray area out there a lot, and people often, misunderstand and misinterpret what's going on for that reason. So I think it is an issue. It's an issue in my practice as well. Sometimes people will come to me. I'm a licensed therapist, and they will say, I have borderline personality disorder. Can you help me with that? And I'm like, well, I hypothetically can, but let's find out first if you do. And it's got to be careful about saying that because people, sort of hold on to their, they wear it like a jacket, sort of hold on to it really close to them that this is what they've got. They sort of figure it out themselves and they come to you with a specific request, can you help me with my OCD? And they'll often say, for example, I've been feeling depressed lately. So I'll say, well, can you describe what you mean? And they'll just start describing it. And actually they're describing something entirely different.
Right.
So it's important to just warn people not to go too far with and getting, stuck on the idea, a label of a diagnosis, and just allow themselves to be open-minded about what's going on with them and not focus too much on the list of symptoms and the label. But
right.
Yeah,
I think personally. When I was in this class, I mentioned abnormal psychology. One interesting thing that happened to me is that as I was reading some of the symptoms and the things that some of these, mental disorders have, I sort of started to, experience some of it, and I started to feel sick in some ways. And it's kind of like our minds are so strong, and when we're reading a script or we're reading something or watching a movie, we watch a scary movie, we start feeling fear, or if we watch a comedy, we start laughing, and we change our mood depending on what we're looking at. Mm-hmm. And I think, sometimes when somebody self-diagnoses and they think, like you said, I'm borderline, I have borderline personality disorder, or I have depression, they start, causing that more by saying it over and over. It's almost like a self-hypnosis thing that we're doing, like reprogramming our minds to feel that way. But I don't know if you ever seen that.
Yeah, I see that quite frequently. I mean, once we make up our minds about something or we start to formulate a belief about something, what we tend to do is we go around gathering evidence for that belief.
There, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And if we don't see the evidence, we skew it or distort it in our mind to match a paradigm of what we believe is the evidence for it. And if that doesn't work, we go out and we breathe life into the evidence. So we somehow manifest it to come true. We somehow influence it, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, to turn out the way we think it ought to, and we use that as evidence. It becomes what they call a confirmational bias. As soon as you see something go a certain way, you say, "Oh, I see, it's my OCD," or whatever it may be. So whatever we believe to be true, we will focus on more. We will fixate on it more. And we will notice things, small, medium, and large, all over the place that matches that. And we will have also a self-corrective part of our brain that flushes anything out that is counter-evidence to it. So this is the problem with self-diagnosing, is that a third-party mental health professional looks at you objectively and doesn't come from a set of beliefs. They come from an approach, but they don't come from a set of beliefs about you. If they do, then then they have their own issues going on. But typically, a third-party mental health professional could look at it very objectively, and whereas sometimes we can't, sometimes we're not.
Yeah. And it's good. I mean, it's good. I'm not saying that diagnosing someone is bad, but in my opinion, I mean, we got to look at where this came from. Like, we have to observe that somebody came up with this name, somebody came up with these labels to help people and be able to, put people in a certain box, let's say. But it's all just observation. When we observe things and we look at things and we see how we are acting and reacting to the world, I think that's where this came from. And, mainly, doctors diagnose people so that they can help them. And usually, if somebody gets diagnosed with something, is because, they can't function in life because of it. So, because I do believe that we all have a little bit of, mental disorders, but we are able to function in real life. Like, we all may feel sad sometime. We're not always happy all the time, but when someone is depressed or sad all the time, to the point where they can't even go to work or they can't even function, that's when we can diagnose them with depression, right?
Absolutely. When it becomes highly distressing to the point where it obstructs your functioning,
right?
That's when it becomes an issue. And I like what you said, because there are lists of criteria or lists of symptoms that have been grouped together to be called something. A lot of that is for ease of communication. Right. A lot of that, I hate to be administrative, a lot of that is for insurance purposes.
Yes, definitely.
But a lot of it also, if someone consults with me, they don't have to take 25 minutes to explain what's been going on with the person. They just say moderate depression with psychotic features, and I understand exactly what they're talking about. What the problem is that people get caught up in that label, so they can get lost in how to treat it or what it means, as opposed to just focusing on what the origin of the problems are, because they tend to be more similar than we think, whether it's depression or OCD, they tend to have similar origins. But yeah, basically that's the idea, is that looking at your problems, you don't want to be focused too much on what the problems are. You want to be focused on what we do about them. How do we treat the actual issues? So yeah.
And also, like I mentioned, observing. Like, if we observe ourselves and we look at, what is going on, like you said, what is the root of the problem? Like, where is it coming from? Why are we acting the way we are acting? And, really to, for me, forget about the label for a little bit and just focus on the actions and the things you're doing, and see if you can, stop some of them or change them or figure out why you're doing it. Where is it coming from? Like we talked about, the root of the problem in the past, and really going deep into where things are coming from. And when we heal those wounds from the past, then we're able to move on and really, change our lives. But a lot of times people focus so much on the label that they keep saying it over and over, and it becomes more important to have a label than to actually heal or feel better. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. Oftentimes a label is a deflection from actually getting to the root of the problem.
Right.
You wear it like a jacket. So this is your issue. My issue is borderline personality. My issue is bipolar. My issue is depression. My issue is OCD. So that exonerates you, in a sense, from having to look at what the origin of the issue is, because you're wearing the issue itself on as a jacket. The issue itself is afflicting you, and you do sometimes focus on the symptoms, but that's actually a major deflection, because you don't have to look at the origins of the issues by saying what you have. And that's the idea, is that if you try to work on just symptoms, you try to not be OCD compulsive about something, you try not to feel depressed, if you try not to have the urge to do something that is not good for you, whether it's food, drugs, alcohol, the more you resist what you're trying to not do, if that makes any sense, the more you send a message to those parts of you that started the problem to begin with, that you don't want to take a look at them. You want to focus on the symptom, which is a deflection. You want to focus, like you just said, on where it came from. What is at the root? What is causing, what is down there that's causing you to have deflected in the first place? Because a lot of these disorders are just major patterns of deflection from looking at what's actually going on. And if we focus on the symptoms, we focus on, I don't want to be depressed today, so I'm going to go do something that makes me happy. Well, that is good. That is a positive, adaptive way of approaching it. But if all you do is keep yourself busy, to not focus on the fact that you're feeling depressed, that you're experiencing depression, you're not looking at the source. And the more you don't look at the source, the more you exacerbate the origin of the problem. The more you tell it you don't want to take a look at it. So the louder it gets, and the more depression will come back. So it becomes a cycle that happens over and over again. Same thing with people who are trying to lose weight. So I'm going to get myself to the gym, and I'm going to cut out all the sweets and this and that. And they do that for a while, and it works out. They're focusing on the symptom. So eventually they're sending the message back to the origin of the problem. I said go away, and I don't want to be fat, and I don't want to deal with you, so to speak. So they focus on the diet. And then the diet works for a while, then it doesn't work anymore because the energy below got louder. So now it's going to take more dieting or something else, something more drastic to keep that energy down. So that's essentially where I come from in that. Yeah.
As you're talking, I think to me, I've been really meditating a lot lately on the fact of loneliness. A lot of times I feel like we're trying to avoid loneliness, and we're trying to avoid feeling empty inside. So we look for ways to fill that void and that emptiness, and we join groups, or we do some kind of studying, or I think that a lot of times that's where our OCD comes from. For example, we are trying to not feel dirty, so we try to clean ourselves up, and there's something about loneliness there somehow that we're just trying to ignore, and we're trying to fill it with other stuff, and we try to keep ourselves busy doing something so that we don't think about that emptiness and that loneliness. And I feel like loneliness is at the root of a lot of problems, because if you look at life and what we do, we're trying to, from the very beginning, we're born, our parents take care of us, but then we're trying to find a career so that we have money, so that we can, buy things that makes us happy. Then eventually we want to find a partner so that we have somebody to be with. But, it's always trying to fill in something that, we can't put our fingers on it, but by doing that, I feel like that's where a lot of the problems come in. And a lot of times, when we have a partner and we have issues with them, we don't want to leave them because we're afraid to be alone. But at the same time, they may be causing us to be borderline, or have bipolar disorder or something, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that we do a lot of things to try to avoid feeling. Period.
Right.
You know, and emptiness, a feeling of emptiness or sadness, for example, in the pit of our stomach, or wherever it shows up, we do a lot. We spend a lot of energy trying to fill up that part of us and not feel fear, not feel sadness, not feel all of those wounds that we had when we were kids. And here's another thing I just got to throw in here. A lot of people tell me, my childhood was great. My parents were wonderful. You know, my upbringing was great. I don't have a lot of traumas. I'm like, when you're young, you have trauma, and we don't call it trauma because it was something serious. We call it trauma because it happened when you were 5. When something happens when you're 5, the experience of that is times 100 because you're very egocentric and everything that happens around you, and it's always personal when you're at that age. So even if your dog ran away for an hour, I often tell clients that could be very traumatic for a kid who's 4. You know, and even if the dog comes back an hour later, how that's processed could be, you know, very traumatic for a 4-year-old. So everybody's got that down there. It's better, of course, easier if you haven't had a lot of direct trauma, but everybody has something. So there's a lot of feelings that we have that we work very hard to try to, like you say, fill up. And the idea for me, I think, is that if you're doing it to avoid feeling, if you're afraid of being inadequate, so you work really hard so that you succeed, that's, again, telling that part of you that feels inadequate, go away. I don't want to deal with you. I don't want to feel inadequate. But if you let yourself feel, sometimes you remember memories where someone made you feel inadequate, particularly when you were younger. If you can let yourself feel those feelings, be with those feelings, and not try to fight them away, not ruminate on them, but just be with them, then you could still go out and try to make yourself successful because that's how you'd like to self-actualize. That's how you'd like to live. But you're not doing it to fill a void. You're allowing the void to be with you. So you can do it mindfully. You can do it integrated, as an integrated person, as opposed to putting all this energy into trying to be something you're afraid to feel again. So you can seek out friends if you're feeling alone, you know, but if you're feeling lonely, be with that sadness, you know, and then go out and seek friends. Don't try to seek out friends so you won't feel sad. You know, it's okay to show up and have sadness and make it a part of you. Most people that we're drawn to, they have a vulnerability about them. You know, we can sort of see there's sadness in their eyes, or we can hear it in their voice, and we just know they've been through something. They're not showing up with it all the time, but we can see it in them. You know, so
yeah, I think it's like the difference between reacting to things in life, you know, versus really just doing things because we want to, you know. And so most people are reacting to fear, reacting to, you know, being afraid of being alone, or reacting to, you know, something that happened in their childhood, and now they're trying to do the opposite of what they did to them when they were younger. And so we're never really free. You know, we'll never really have that freedom to act, you know, at will, or however we choose to act, and do the things that we want to do, not, you know, what people want us to do, or what, you know, we're reacting to from the past.
Right.
So to free ourselves from everything, I think it's important to really observe and to notice where are our feelings coming from, you know, and like you said, be okay with those feelings, and to, you know, if we have fear, the best way to deal with fear is to face it, you know, to see it, to observe it. Where is it coming from? How big is it? You know, how can we, how are we reacting to it? And what are we doing, you know, that's reacting to that fear? And try to see if we can, you know, do what we want and not what the fear wants us to do, you know?
Yeah. And something else that could be very helpful for people is when we say, be with your fear or be with your sadness, a lot of people might think, well, I don't want to, because that means that I'm accepting so many things about myself that I don't want to be true. But here's the other trick that, you know, not trick, but technique, is that most of what you told yourself when you were younger isn't true. You know, because you were younger, you didn't have ways to ward it off, you know, or process it or defend yourself. You know, so what you took in, that sadness, that fear, especially when you were younger, you also took in a lot of beliefs around it, about yourself, about the world. So if I go back to my sadness, people say that means I'm going to start to accept myself as this pathetic, inadequate, etc., etc. It's like, no, you're not those things. You know, those feelings are there, but you're not those things. The conclusions you drew from them are not true. And being with the feelings allows you to go back to yourself as a younger self and say, hey, That wasn't true. Whatever that person said to you, and we know who those people are, wasn't true.
Right.
It just wasn't true. But you're going to say, but I really believe it is. Of course you do, because belief's been with you for a long time. But being with the feelings gives you an opportunity to go back and give those feelings some of your attention and saying it's not true. What those kids are saying, the bullies are saying, the teachers are saying, family is saying, it's not real. So that gives you an access to be able to be with those feelings and then go out and self-actualize. Now, how do you want to be successful? Now, how do you want to meet people? Now, how do you want to keep yourself busy? So I think that's the kind of integration that is the ultimate goal for people,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when you say self-actualized, can you explain that a little bit more for people who never heard that word or that phrase before?
Sure. If I can understand it myself, I will.
Right. One of my favorite things, by the way.
Really, yeah. Well, self-actualization, people could look it up. Actually, I think at the top of Maslow's list of hierarchy of needs, I think it's the last one, the top one. Mm-hmm. To self-actualize, the way I see it anyway, is to give yourself a sense of purpose, to have established your esteem, which is below it, feeling of confidence and courage and centeredness, and then give yourself a mission, a sense of purpose, a mission statement, something that lights you up while helps other people, supports other people at the same time, something that gives contribution both to yourself and others, something that is worth getting up for in the morning, as the adage goes. Something that inspires you to get up in the morning, motivates you to do that. Also leaves yourself open for growth, open for change, open for input. A self-synergy, I guess, is the best way I can put it. How would you put it? Because it's your subject.
Well, when I was in school, I had a teacher who talked about this, and he talked about self-actualization as enlightenment. And I feel like, the way I understand enlightenment and the way I understand self-actualization, they're very similar, but I feel like self-actualization is more like a westernized version of enlightenment. Because, you talk about, fulfilling yourself and doing this and that. But enlightenment is more like realizing yourself, like really knowing who you really are. It's coming to terms with you as a spiritual being. And, there's a lot of really deep meaning to enlightenment. And it's, remembering, if you believe in reincarnation, all about your past lives and who you really are and really, really knowing yourself. And self-actualization, I feel like it's reaching that self, best of yourself, like reaching your potential 100%, like getting to the top of what you can be, on top of the pyramid, like you mentioned, where you've done it all, and you achieved that. And according to my professor, there's very, very few people who have actually done that in this country, in the U.S., and in the world. And the same with enlightenment. There's very few people who've reached enlightenment, and and there's multiple versions of enlightenment. There's people who say that we are all enlightened, we just haven't realized it yet. And then there's people who say that enlightenment is a state of mind that you have to reach and you have to work towards it to get there. But ultimately, I think it's really getting to that point where you know who you are, and it's, in a way, it's like self-diagnosing. It's kind of like giving yourself a label, but this is more like realizing who you are, and not just the label of it. I don't know if that connects it or not, but I think it sounds cool.
Yeah, it does. I like how you say enlightenment, and I like how you separate it from East and West in terms of what we see as enlightenment, and our social constructs here in the West as opposed to how they are in the East. And getting in touch with who you really are, your spiritual sense of self, whatever that means to you, being self-actualized. Yeah. Maybe it can mean different things to different people. I guess it depends on, I wonder what Maslow meant, I don't know. But I think a lot of it is, could also be cultural as well. So, but
the idea is getting, it's like developing yourself, right?
Yeah.
It's like evolving to a better self, a better you, someone who has grown inside, I guess.
Yeah, and I like evolving because one thing I was thinking is that I don't think you ever quite do self-actualize entirely. You're always working towards it. And that always gives you a reason to continue with the, purpose in life. No matter how old you get, you can always self-actualize more. So,
Yeah, and then we talked about, all this self-diagnosing and all this mental disorders. And I think that, we can change over time. We don't always have to stay in one place. And I feel like we're constantly developing. And so labeling ourselves with one thing, I think, to me, is not helpful. Because we can be labeled differently at different times of our lives. So I think the best thing for me is to learn or to realize that we're constantly flowing and moving and changing, and life is change. And I feel like, if we accept that change, we're going to be healthier over time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing, is that you're right. When you give yourself a label, it becomes sort of stagnant, doesn't it? It sort of sits there like you either have it or you don't.
Right.
And you're right, you're flowing. And that's one of the symbols or metaphors I give for, say, depression, is people, I've had clients compare it to Mary Poppins, sort of floating in and floating out, because you're not, whatever you are afflicted with, you're not always afflicted at a level of 10. Sometimes it's a 9, sometimes it's a 3, sometimes it's a 5. So it fluctuates, it floats. So it goes in and it goes out, and it goes in and it goes out in a pattern, in a certain kind of a pattern. So there's constant change going on, constant flowing going on. So you don't have it or you don't. There's a pattern to the patterns. And mental disorders are patterns to which make it easier for us to understand what's been going on with you. And literally, honestly, it just gives clinicians an easier way to start asking certain questions so they can help you get to the root of what it is. The root is going to be the same. That's my hypothesis, but the root is going to be the same. They might say certain kinds of traumas lead to certain kinds of afflictions. Well, maybe, but trauma is still leading to affliction. So it's going to trace back to the same place. What happened when you were 4, what happened when you were 10, how it manifests later on is just a collection of how it manifested. It's not something that like a jacket that you wear, so to speak. So that's why self-diagnosing is, I've had clients literally, like, it's just more important for them to be right about what they've got as opposed to dealing with where it came from.
Right.
And it just, sometimes I'm on the verge of saying, not only is self-diagnosing not a good idea, I sometimes want to scream at them and say, it doesn't matter what you've got.
Right?
It matters where it came from, right?
Yes.
It doesn't matter. Only thing that matters if you're in danger or you're a danger to yourself or others, in terms of sometimes people do, are prescribed medication if it becomes so acute they can't function. So knowing what to give people, that makes a difference in terms of diagnosing. There are certain safety precautions to take, in terms of, knowing certain patterns. But yeah, otherwise it's just like you said, a label and a jacket, and yeah, it prevents you from self-actualizing. How about that?
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Neil, for your time. Are there any last words before we finish? We're almost out of time.
Yeah, get out there and self-actualize, and don't self-diagnose, and don't diagnose your friends.
Yeah.
And don't diagnose your exes.
Okay. Yeah, and I would say go out there and reach enlightenment, work towards enlightenment. I think knowing yourself is the most important thing you can do in this life. Yes, you can have a lot of money, you can have a lot of success through fame and fortune, but if you don't know who you are, then that all that fame and all that money could be empty.
Right.
But knowing who you are, it doesn't, sometimes it's priceless, because even if you had all the money in the world, you can't really reach that insight unless you take the time to go inside of yourself and to really meditate on that and go back in time and see where you came from, where things come from, and really know you.
Yeah.
So,
and it's important to know also that emotions don't kill you.
Yeah, exactly.
Emotions do not kill you. It's what we do to try to distract from them that kills us.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Neil. We'll see you next week, same time, here on whatever platform you listen to your podcasts. And remember, this is MindFit, and this is Neil Babins and Robert Aceves. Have a great time.
Thanks.
This podcast is brought to you by MindFit. Please help us to share this podcast with your friends and family to grow this community. And if you'd like to donate to this podcast, or if you'd like to share your comments, questions, or concerns, send them to mindfitpodcast@gmail.com, or you can call us directly at 714-328-4661.